Okay, ready when you are.
Okay. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this Planning Commission and Zoning Board meeting. Catherine, do we have any agendas, minutes to approve, modify the agenda? Do we have any, not minutes, do we have any modifications to the agenda to call out?
So I guess the only thing would be just to think about sort of procedurally how we're gonna do this. The joint meeting is really the planning commission and zoning board discussion portion, and the rest of it is more of a planning commission discussion. So if we'd wanna move the minutes later, sort of as there usually are, I'll make sure those are later going forward.
Okay.
And if we wanna add, I don't know, be an adjournment to the zoning board after the discussion, or just, what do we think?
Do you have a
Just to make
preference, Nick?
that,
I'm fine with leaving the agenda as is, but whatever, Catherine, you recommend.
I just wanna make it easier for you all, like if you don't wanna stick around for the whole thing, or feel like you're, I guess it's just.
We're here, we're
we're here.
dedicated. people,
Okay,
so-
and I know
So
Hubie's here.
we've got
for
everything on
discussion.
here. The only thing that's not really for the ZBA, that echo is really irritating, are the minutes, really, right?
Sure.
So I would say we just keep the minutes for the planning commission minutes on. We'll get them out of the way. I would like them at the end
Okay,
going forward.
Yep.
But that way, you know, call this to order and we'll just move forward from that point.
Okay.
We don't have any actions tonight, so we don't have to worry about motions or anything like that. It really is just a discussion and workshop. So I would like to, actually not even amend the agenda, leave it as is.
okay.
So with that, I would like a motion, and you guys don't have a quorum at this point, so I don't think you need it, but if you'd like to join in on
We
this.
do have a quorum.
We
You
do
do
have
have
a
a quorum.
Yep.
No, right, okay. So let's do this as two items of the minutes. I would like separate motions from the planning commission and from the zoning board to approve the agenda, the route we're going forward.
I'll make the motion for the zoning board that we approve the agenda.
Is there a second for the zoning board agenda?
I'll second it.
All of those in favor indicate by saying aye for the
Aye.
zone. Aye. Does that pass
That works for me.
4-0?
Motion passes. Same thing for the planning commission.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda for the planning.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Where is there, 6 of us tonight?
5, 1, 2.
Count 5. Okay, 5. Okay,
Or is it 6? Wait,
Is
is
Ian?
Ian,
Josh,
Ian is
Yeah.
official.
me.
Oh, Ian's official?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and so the agendas have been approved by both the zoning board and the planning commission by unanimous votes. Before we get into the public to be heard, I'd like to introduce Ian as a planning commission member, effective whenever he was appointed. And also he's on the zoning board, so we've got, you know, another dual role, so it works out. Welcome.
Thank you.
So for the planning commissioners, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from,
I move we approve the minutes from May 23rd, 2024.
A second?
moved by Shu, seconded by Georgia. Does anyone want to offer any amendments to the minutes as written? Hearing none. For planning commissioners, all those in favor of the minutes as presented signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries 6-0. 2, 3, 4.
It's confusing, I know.
Okay.
The double duties here.
So, Sharon, did you want to introduce them?
Well, I just wanted to point out that we have our soon-to-be July 1st zoning board member, Stephanie, sorry, thank you, Bixby. And she's here to kind of start observing and learning.
Great, welcome. Be happy to have you.
Don't act like him.
And you're welcome to come up to the table if you'd like.
No, I'm good right
You're
now.
good? Okay.
If I have time to sit at the table, I'll sit right now.
Okay. No problem.
All right, so we're into the discussion period. DRB transition.
Okay. So there was a bunch of material that got sent out to everybody, and just to sort of bring us up to speed where we are. So we've had some meetings, some discussions, some, I think, decisions have been made. There are several that need to be made still. And I think I tried to summarize this in a little brief outline memo that I think one big thing is figuring out how the development review is going to be done for the DRB. And I, realize that none of you are on the DRB, but I think having, the understanding that there will be some of you on the DRB, I think it's good to start that discussion. Don't really want to be at the first DRB meeting in January, not really knowing how to go forward. So I think that, the more we can do ahead of time to get it lined up in order, the easier it'll be. The closer we get, and then actually on that date. And then the other thing is, well, I guess a couple other things. So one I said was the zoning regulation updates. So just that those are coming along. We still have some work to do on that. Ideally the zoning updates would be approved by the approved on the planning commission side in the fall, and then the select board before January 1st, but it can happen later. And just looking through my packet here, just in the order that I have things. So there was a memo that I sent to the select board, just giving them an update of where we are and where we're headed. And so the plan right now is that there would be some sort of resolution that would go before the select board in August that would say, okay, here's the number of DRB members we're proposing. Here's the terms, and then allow the select board to approve starting interviews starting in September. So, or hopefully even like wrapping it up in their second September meeting. I think they only have one meeting in September. I take that back. So whatever that meeting is, I think it's maybe the 16th of September. So thinking on wanting to get an idea on your end as members, how many of you are going to hope to be on the DRB? And I think that's helpful, one, just sort of knowing where we're going to land, but also secondly, we were thinking 7 members on the DRB. Is 5 a better number? We don't want to get into a place where we're having a hard time filling a board of 7. So maybe 5 is a better number to recommend. So I think that's something that I want us to talk about. I also put in the packet just what we had prepared as staff for the meeting dates and deadlines for the ZBA and the Planning Commission, realizing that the closer we get to January 1st, the less likely could be that an application would have time to be heard by the board that it's before. And an application needs to be completed review by the board that's hearing it. So that doesn't mean that if you have an application that is a 3-step process, it has to be through all 3 steps, but it needs to be, like, say, completed the preliminary review by the Planning Commission, or a conditional use can't be continued to be heard in January by the DRB.
Is that going to be that an applicant can continue to submit at any point in time, but there'll be a point in time which they said this application will
Yeah.
not be deemed complete prior to January?
Or we're going to schedule you for whatever the first DRB meeting is in January. So, we have this up online now, really starting on October 10th is a meeting date. We might not be scheduling an application on October 10th because it could be a really complicated one. We don't want to run into problems with it. If it's a really simple application, if it's something on the consent agenda, some boundary adjustment, maybe a sketch plan, it could be okay. So we'll kind of take it case by case. I think we have a similar date for the ZBA of a meeting date of October 3rd. So if somebody submits for that date, they're subject to not be heard. The ZBA's applications are generally a little more simple, so I think it's more likely that could happen.
Yeah.
But just wanted to give everybody a heads up of just fair
With-
warning.
With
essentially.
this, in the past, there has been an issue of the clock starts once the application is deemed complete, or does the clock start once the public hearing is over? Because what I want to make sure is if we don't, they get it in the door and they're not heard until January, maybe even February, is there a chance that it could just sail through without review?
No, if we have them scheduled for a meeting, we're fine. Yeah, we're fine with that. I think if it's an application that's particularly complicated, maybe as staff, we would try to get them to have it more complete.
Right.
I think sometimes some applications that come through maybe could use a little more time. So we're starting to tell the developers and engineers, or actually most of the ones that we work with, we have told.
Right.
So they know that we're entering a stage of flux. So I think we're pretty good there. So the next part of the packet was several different versions of rules of procedure and conflict of interest policies. And this was just a way to help us start the discussion about, really how should meetings be run, or how do you think they should be run? So we have Charlotte, and they're the town that most recently switched over to a DRB, so it's a pretty new set of rules. We have the Planning Commission, the Zoning Board, and then there's a model rules of procedure from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Before you, Catherine, on the PC meeting dates and deadlines,
Yes.
in the red print at the bottom, it says the Development Review Board, development, is that
It's French.
Boston language, or is that
French.
French? It's,
I kind of like it that way.
you kind of,
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. We can make that change. Okay, so I don't know if I necessarily want to be the one to suggest how a meeting should be run, and I'm not sure the best way to go about having that discussion either. But I was thinking it might be helpful for maybe the Planning Commission to explain how a development application is reviewed, and then the ZBA explain how it's reviewed on their end. Would that be-
I think our meeting flow has been pretty consistent for a fair time. The applicant is brought to the table or brings themselves to the table. Generally, the item as listed on the agenda is called out, and our flow is to turn to staff and ask staff to present the report, because it's their report. And they present to us what they've written. Generally, they don't go through page by page because we've had the report in our hands. We to line by line description of it. And we look for discrepancies. We look for the points of contention, points of agreement. We want to see what work has been done successfully with the applicant before it hits the door, what work might remain, and then what the recommendation is. At that point, normally we look to the other commissioners to say, does anybody have any questions for staff? If there are none, we go to the applicant, and the applicant presents their viewpoint. We really ask them to present what they disagree with in the staff report, because that's what we're working on. We're not looking for a new dialogue. We're not looking for a new report. The staff report is what we're using. So what do they agree or disagree with on that? Usually, what do they disagree with? Then we open it up for discussion amongst the Planning Commission, again, to any additional questions for staff or applicant. And then oftentimes the commissioners say nothing at this point, and we'll open the public hearing up. Take the public comment for period of time until there usually is a lull in input. And then if it's a contentious situation, I may bring it back to the table and not close the public hearing, but announce that the questions are gonna, the discussion is gonna come back to the table for the time being. Have any additional discussion, open it back up to the public if there are additional questions. And if there are none, then we will have a motion to close the public hearing and go into deliberations, which will be what they are. They'll either be, back and forth on items. We may want to recraft wording. Once the discussions have happened enough, and we will engage with the applicant as needed. But generally, we do that when the public forum is open. So if things come up, we have the opportunity for the public to engage still, not randomly, but once we close the public hearing, there usually isn't a long time before we go to a decision, before somebody offers a motion. The exceptions have been when there's additional high-level discussion we feel we need to have, and we may make motions to go into deliberative session, which is a non-public facing deliberation, where we do the deliberations out of the public eye. We use that seldomly, but we do use it because there are times that we need to not have the back and forth continue. We need to put questions at the table. And because it's not in the public eye, that's the primary reason we don't use it. The goal has been to be pretty much out in the open. From that, it's either a decision, or if we come out a deliberative has its own process. But once we get to the point of offering a motion, there's additional tweaking that might need to be done. We do findings. We'll have our own planning commission findings. It's a section that we added into the process a number of years ago to memorialize thought process. Why did we do a waiver? What were we thinking when we did a waiver? So we can sort of memorialize some of the context of that decision. Generally, we don't recraft the stipulations unless staff and the applicant have agreed that there's something that needs to be removed. Might be an update to acreage, or maybe that a stipulation is redundant. So remove things. But what have I missed, John? Been here for.
That was about it. Usually there's a pretty good discussion about, findings before we get to a motion. To hammer out what we discussed to make sure that that's going to get captured.
Josh, any thoughts?
I think that captures it pretty well. I agree. I like the planning commission commentary that we've added, I don't know how many years ago, but explaining our decisions. I like that as a little thing at the end. We have made a little more use of deliberative recently, I think, but it's still a pretty rare tool. But I think you captured it.
Georgia or Trevor, you guys have been here long enough now to have thoughts on the process and how we do it. And
I think it's a pretty good process. I don't know. I'm not from. Sometimes I would like to deliberate in private, but I know that's you want to be out in the open about everything. But
we have the tool, so it's
yeah.
Yep. Okay. Georgia?
Yeah. No, I think that covers it.
Okay.
Okay. For the zoning board, it doesn't sound actually too different from planning commission. We, as a semi-judicial body, swear in anybody who's interested in providing any testimony in the evening for or against or providing any information. And so we open up the fact-finding for the motion at hand, read the information that's in the packet. Then we usually ask for a staff update, anything that may have changed or been updated since the packet was created. Usually that's only a couple minutes, just really brief update from staff. And then we ask the applicant themselves just to give us a little bit more detail. So I open it up as more of a discussion point for the applicant to explain the idea, the process, the project, whatever the case may be. And then after hearing that from that testimony from the applicant, I open it up to zoning board members to ask questions of the applicant or of staff. And so we just take turns going down the line to clarify any vague or gray areas, identifying anything that there might be conflict with. And so after hearing both staff and the applicants, and then we'll open it up to anybody who might be interested in providing testimony from the general public. It's pretty rare, but it happens from time to time. Usually we would, if it's a large group, then we would need to divide the people interested in providing testimony either in favor or against, and so we would take turns doing it in a group session that way. And then after hearing everybody's testimony, we would close the fact-finding and deliberate amongst the members, always in public. I don't know if I've ever attended a meeting where we needed to close and deliberate privately, but we also have that tool available to us if need be. And so after identifying our any conditions and identifying any of the fact findings that we need to put in writing, we make a motion for approval and vote.
So the actual document that becomes the approval letter for each, or the approval, I think is a little different. Is that right, Sharon? Right. Like
So they'll modify the findings or conditions during the meeting.
Yeah.
And then we will, staff will prepare an approval letter to which the chair comes in and signs when they're instructed.
for both the ZBA
for
and
both the PC. and sometimes it's, I have to remind Dusty a couple of times. No, kidding. The little bit of difference with the planning commission is usually they sign their letters at the next meeting, next planning commission meeting. The zoning board has not met very often, so we get the chair to come in, who's very prompt.
Yeah, one area, we don't have a specific procedure for a deliberative session. We would do that in our procedures as executive session. So I was a little, found it a little strange that the planning commission has both an executive session and a deliberative session. Why wouldn't the executive session cover both?
Executive session, from our experience, you have to have very specific criteria to go into it.
Well, couldn't you say you're going into executive session to deliberate?
No.
No.
Well, you can't.
The executive session has to be justifiable under very small set of circumstances. Legal review, personnel issues,
real estate.
real estate, that sort of, it's a very specific set of guidelines.
Did not know that.
Deliberative is just a deliberation session, so it is a fine point, but we are allowed to go in to a deliberative session to do that discussion. Previous commissioners who've been to other communities had shared that some communities do all of their deliberations in a deliberative session. They take all the input and then say, see you later. And come out and issue a decision. Any decision is memorialized in public. You don't take notes, you don't take minutes or something like that during deliberative. You come out and you then memorialize for the record out of public, out of the deliberative session.
Yeah, same as like an executive session, that you wouldn't make a motion in the executive session. You would, you might form it or whatever, but yeah, so that's interesting. That's probably a hole in our procedures. If not that we ever have gone into deliberative session, but if we needed to, we don't have that within our procedures. We've always, we've always deliberated in open. Interesting. No, I had not realized that.
And the other point is the deliberative. We don't take any testimony during deliberative. At that point, it is just the PC and staff. Or we include staff generally as part of the discussion, but again, it's not a common tool. It's generally used when things are very tense. It's hard to get to a point of quiet.
And there have been times where the ZBA has had to reopen their session deliberative session, public.
Yeah, fact-finding,
yeah.
reopen fact-finding, yeah.
So, but, you know, again, the zoning board, it's a little bit difficult because we rarely met and the applications are
I mean, from listening to your explanation, the biggest difference seems to be the verbiage. You know, you open it for fact-finding, you open it for discussion and presentation. It really doesn't, it sounds like it's technology.
Right. Yeah, it's testimony under oath in both cases. You know, yeah.
So, I mean, it might be interesting. I saw that there were others in there, and they get pretty specific. And is there a reason that we can't just try to mush our two procedures together and see what the overlap is?
Not at all. No, and that's
just-
something that I could take a whack at, and
I mean, if everything's in there and it's just the language, then it could just be.
Well, with all due respect, I don't think everything is in there, okay?
Okay.
You know, particularly looking at the examples that have been provided from these other DRBs, okay? I think that they've pointed out some things that that should be included as a part of the.
Bring up
Of
an
the,
example. Let's hash on it.
And one thing that going through this package, it was kind of near the end, this piece from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and it says, please note there that not all sections are customizable.
Yeah.
Some highlighted sections, section 2, 3, and 7, mirror state law and are only included to remind public bodies of their legal obligations and therefore must be left unchanged. That's pretty strong language that suggests that these sections, section 2 is agendas, section 3 is meetings, and the other section, what is it here? Is meeting minutes. You know, so meeting minutes, that's simply, it says minutes must be taken of every meeting of the body. Okay, so that's not a big deal. But some of these other things, I think if you bounce these, what they're saying are non-negotiable, we'd find them in conflict a little bit with some of the existing procedures that exist for both Planning Commission and Zoning Board.
and those are all driven by statute.
Right,
Those
right.
three.
So,
So,
so I guess that, again, that language, the way, you know, I think it's poorly worded because it says, therefore must be left unchanged. So that suggests that you don't have any opportunity to make adjustments in your agenda procedures or the meeting procedures. That just doesn't seem right. I would think the language would be something like you say, this is all governed by statute, and therefore the substantial meaning of these sections must not be changed, or something like that. But to say it's an absolute, must be left unchanged, that's, I can't believe that they wrote that.
They do have an out for that, as far as notwithstanding the chair, managers, administrators, clerks' authority over the agenda, the body may amend the content. So I mean, they do have, if you think.
There's some wiggle room in there a little bit, but there's not a lot. But I mean, based on what they have listed, all of these requirements and saying must be left unchanged. Left unchanged.
And that would be if we were to use this. So if we didn't use this, this is how to customize and adopt these rules, this model of rules of procedure. We're not using this model. I mean, I understand what they say, don't change them, but I'm interpreting that off the fly, on the fly, is that if we use this model, we don't make modifications to the verbiage they put in there, except in certain places. If we don't use that model, I would think we still have to have statute accommodated. I think we do, as far as advance notice and so forth.
yeah, the difference between a special meeting and a regular meeting, and posting of agendas in certain places and at a certain time,
Yeah.
you know, those things. I think it's good to have in there.
I didn't see anything in this VCLT stuff that seemed like it was apart from what we're doing already. The only thing I noticed that was different was the time allotment was part of that meeting thing, but other than that, I think we're covered on everything else.
But if we were to use this, I think, to
Yeah,
your point, if
yeah.
we were to use this, there are sections we can't edit, what they're saying.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying is that statement about being left unchanged only pertains to if this model is being used. I'll buy that.
That doesn't say we can't add.
I was gonna say, because a lot of the procedures that we're talking about are, there's quite a few nuances in both zoning and planning. Plus, if you look at these other DRB procedures that have been provided, there are a lot of things within those procedures, I think, that probably could be tweaked into the procedures that currently exist here.
I saw something in the Charlotte DRB. They say something about if you don't like the decision, you can go to an environmental court, and then they don't say anything else about it.
Applicants?
Well-
Is it the applicant?
The applicant, yeah.
So
They can-
appeal,
it's
an
common
appeal
appeal.
to the environmental court.
Yeah, that's the procedure anyway, is that
Oh.
the appeal is made to the environmental court.
So
Yeah, there's,
does that have to be formed as well? Or,
No.
It's in our zoning regulations already
Wouldn't need to
and,
be in the procedures.
and in state statute too.
That's the current procedure.
there's no recourse to come back to the zoning board and ask for a new hearing, or back to the planning commission and ask for a new hearing, right? Unless there's a big change in what you're proposing. Then
Or
that
the
would be a-
environmental court says,
Right.
do it,
Right, right.
which has happened.
Yeah, the appeals
We
process
have
is
had
through.
a motion to reconsider in the planning commission many years ago. Birchwood,
I'm just trying to get it straight. The environmental court, is that an actual legal
yes.
court?
Yeah.
It is? Oh, okay. I thought it was something that you had to establish on your own, but
No, that's
it's
a-
not.
You come to judge.
Yeah, so essentially it's the next step. If somebody doesn't like a decision by the town board, they can then appeal it
I
to the higher court, or, you know, higher board to review it.
So I would think it might be interesting to see, take the ZBA, procedures and the PC procedures as they exist without editing them necessarily, and just smoosh them together and see what is redundant, what are we missing, and then maybe look at Charlotte or whatever and see, to your point, if something in there we might be able to tweak. But I feel like we've got a relatively good starting point from the existing documentation. And especially with the planning commission, if you take out anything related to planning activities, that should take a chunk of that out in the document a little bit.
Okay, I think that sounds like a good place to go. Was there anything in particular from, say, Charlotte or the model that seemed to stand out? I know Hubie kind of pointed out a little bit of the way that was worded for the VLCT, but is there?
Yeah, I have, and I think maybe some of you have heard me speak about this previously. And I'm not sure the best way to approach this, but I have I'll say it out, I have an issue with video conferencing, okay? I don't think that it's handled well. When I see somebody come via video and they're posting a picture of themselves, or their video is off, I don't think that's appropriate. I'm not sure how that can be rectified, whether there can be language, something that says in-person presence is encouraged. I I honestly believe that sometimes people use the video conferencing or the telephone access as an excuse not to be here. If you are a presenter, you should be able to face your accuser. That is, if someone is on the video conference and they are objecting to this application, how can you meet somebody eye to eye? It's been well known that body language, inflection of voice, and so on are a huge part of communication. And you lose that when it comes via video. I understand the purpose of video for those that it's difficult for them to attend. They have other obligations, babysitting, whatever, incapacity, whatever. But it needs to be tightened up some way. And I'm also a believer in not reinventing the wheel. I don't think I'm the first one that's had this concern. I'm wondering if there are other places that have addressed this some way. And anyway, that's how I feel about video conferencing. It really bugs me when somebody is video conferencing and you don't see their video. They've turned their video off and they're speaking. They're providing testimony. You have to swear somebody in over video, and how is that happening? You're meeting. Is this? Well, I'm using my wife's email, so it says it says you're seeing Judy, but it's Bob. Well, is it really Bob? Or so anyway, there are those kinds of things that make that process uncomfortable. Not going to go away. I understand that, and so on, but it needs to be tightened up some way.
So I think having rules of expectations or expected behavior in meetings is perfectly appropriate.
Is that it's important
Yeah.
that somebody be present at the designated meeting location. So if it's important for at least one to be there, maybe it's important for as many as possible.
Well, it's important also to be here in case a member of the public wants to come to the meeting.
Well, yes,
They
yeah,
have a piece of
yeah.
this, so.
So anyway, it's
Okay. That makes, I think we don't have a policy for hybrid meetings other than what we got during COVID, really, so it seems like that's an appropriate addition. Could be under attendance for that matter. But- So, good catch. Now, do you guys, do you feel that as a starting point, it still is worth just working from our existing procedures and then seeing what is missing or what can be enhanced or removed or whatever?
Absolutely. I think
So-
that would be a lot easier,
Yeah.
a lot
Recording
easier
in
for
progress.
staff as well to make those adjustments.
Catherine, does that sound,
Mm-hmm.
turn the sound off on my computer just because I listened.
Yeah, is Josh gone?
I don't know, Josh, he might be gone because he was on my phone. Josh, you still?
I'm still here.
We're back up.
You can try to reconnect if you want.
I've been giving it a try, and I've still just been getting.
Okay.
I tried
Let-
to connect via the phone, so I'm gonna do this until.
Okay, I think you're getting picked up on Scott's mic, so I think that's being covered, so.
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
So what's next?
Well, so one other question I had was, two other things. So how many of you want to be on the DRB, and are you ready to talk about that this evening? And if you are willing to be or want to be, everyone is going to be required to apply. So, your existing members on these boards, but it's a new board. The policy for the select board is for the interview, application and interview for new members. So just to give you a heads up. So that would likely be that September meeting that I mentioned, September 16th, I believe. So,
As the chairman, I feel I should probably go first to answer that question or address it.
yeah,
I intend to move forward with DRB service.
okay, great. Anyone else?
I'm probably going to sit on the PC.
I want to stay as well.
You said PC?
I intend to apply for the DRB.
Effort?
Well, I guess I'll apply to the DRB. Stay on the planning board, or?
You can apply to both, can't you?
You don't have to apply for the PC because you're already on it.
Right, right.
So anyone who's currently on the PC, just term continues as is.
Okay. Yes, I might apply.
So in the air a little bit for the DRB.
No, I'll apply.
Yeah. Okay.
You just
Twist
wanna-
your arm.
You want to stay on the PC as well?
Yes.
Okay.
If that doesn't ruffle any feathers.
No, I think that's great.
That's good.
Yeah.
My intent, I think, is to remain on PC. If needed for DRB, I would consider it. One at a time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Josh?
I would just want to remain on the PC, no DRB.
Dusty?
What? What does it give you for numbers?
Well, so far I have Nick, Hubie, and Trevor for the DRB. Is that right?
We might have Mike,
Mike.
Paula, we don't
Paula
know.
expressed
Civil.
interest in-
In both?
Mm-hmm. And Mike. So that is, so if it's Nick, Hubie, Trevor, Paula, and Mike, and we also have our new member, Stephanie, who's in the mix.
And Stephanie,
Stephanie, why don't you pop over to the table for a minute, because this involves you.
Corner where there's a mic.
You gotta sit next to the other ZBA person.
There's a mic right.
Just
well,
have a
this
seat.
gets
We'll-
so
So
complicated,
complicated, doesn't it?
Already, isn't it?
I'm used to this complication. I sit at board meetings monthly.
I thought that's what I did.
Don't mess with the microphone.
Yeah, I will likely apply. I applied. I was not under the assumption that I would have to reapply. When I applied for the zoning board, I kind of thought it was going to morph. That wasn't clearly stated, so yeah, I'll probably apply.
and
Oh, and I've applied to be the alternate on the PC, so that way I can gain a little more of your process. So I feel like I'm a little bit more ready to go. I'm a planner, and as far as like I want to know how things work, so I can be of best service and contribute.
There's preference given to people that are already sitting on the CBA.
for both, I think.
And PC.
And so, it's not like it's
And the PC won't have an alternate starting January 1st, right?
Correct.
So that's just until January 1st.
Right.
Well,
And the
maybe.
DRB can have an alternate,
Right.
Right.
but not the planning commission.
Seems like at least 7 people for the DRB,
Yeah.
if you're still wondering, 5 or 7.
So I have 6, and not including Dustin.
I think we should be going for 7.
I think
Targeting
sounds
7,
good.
because if you don't get 7, you can drop it down to 5.
Mhm.
It's gonna be hard to increase it
Yeah.
back.
Okay, this has been very helpful. Right. All right, does anyone have any other lingering concerns, questions about the DRB transition that we should be talking about? Not that this will be the last time, but have I missed something?
it's good.
It might be good as a thought for the DRB, for the first meeting of the DRB, to be either be a workshop. If the makeup of the DRB is folks that have not done development review,
Mhm.
Or even because it might be a good idea to have an idea of a workshop, at least for half an hour beforehand, so that it is an open forum on discussion on process, how are we gonna dot our i's and cross our t's, before you get into it and get stuck at a point in a motion or a point in a review that you don't know where to go forward.
Maybe that could even happen in the fall too. If the appointments are made in September,
Yeah.
then there would be, several months there where there could be more sort of informal meetings.
Yep.
I think that's a great idea. That made me think of something else as you were.
Because the DRB is not gonna be, I don't expect the development review process for the DRB to be the same as it was for the zoning board or for the PC, because of, a different makeup of people. You're not gonna be having any tilt of, how does that fit in future development? It's really gonna be I see it as being looking at the application that's in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
So the scope is gonna be narrower for the PC and broader for the ZBA. I think there really should be some discussion, real-time discussion. How are we gonna process this through? Take an application, look at it, talk it through.
It's a great idea. Yeah. And I think in the fall would be preferable.
How do you want, what do you want the reports to look like?
Yep.
All those pieces and parts should be worked out, if possible, ahead of time, so that you're not doing it on the fly and missing something inadvertent.
What I suggest also is to get a copy of the statute regarding DRBs, so that everybody that's gonna be on the DRB will be able to read that. And then, one of the things that I've been concerned about DRB wise is that because preliminary site plan review, and so on, is different than a zoning board review, and that to distinguish those two things. But I think the answer is really quite simple, is that it's in the warning, is the way that the application is warned, so that the wording explicitly states this is being reviewed by the DRV as a variance. This is being reviewed by the DRB as a conditional approval, okay, under the current zoning regulation. So it distinguishes whether this is a zoning type issue versus a planning type issue, okay? But again, I think that can be clarified in the way that the warning is published.
So you will see an agenda that has maybe a sketch plan approval and maybe a variance request. And it's called out at the top, and it's called out for each item.
Right, and then again, that's why it's in the sense that now, and I know it's the DRB, it's not the zoning board and the planning commission together, it's the DRB.
Right.
So, but it's like, the DRB is now acting as a zoning function, as opposed to a planning function, okay? So how can you do that without saying it? And by having, so for example, you don't want to have on your agenda, be listening to a variance, and then a site plan review, and then a conditional review. Those, you're skipping around, okay, from acting like a quasi-judicial board to a non-quasi-judicial board. I mean, not that the DRB is non-quasi-judicial when they're doing a preliminary site plan review, but it's not as binding as it is for a final decision. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I'm making it more confusing as it
I think the applications, as
is.
they come in the door and as they're deemed complete, it's going to dictate what goes on the agenda, just like it does for a zoning board and a planning commission.
So, yeah, and I think all applications before the DRB are zoning issues, are not planning issues. So even if we're talking about a sketch plan, and that's something that's allowed by statute, and it is to be reviewed by the DRB, so it's not binding, but a preliminary, I think in Essex, we've had an appeal of preliminary before, back when I was planner something up on like West Sleepy Hollow Road, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And it was binding, you know, so there's very little that's not actually binding for review.
So for site plan review, do you swear in testimony, for testimony?
Yes,
Or preliminary site plan review?
yes. And even sketch
sketch.
plan.
Or
The only
sketch
one we
plan?
don't
That's
is
what I'm-
conceptual.
For so for conceptual,
You don't, because there's no formal staff report written up. If somebody wants to come before the table and just throw maybe a couple ideas, hey, what do you guys like a little better?
yeah,
Type
see, I guess
thing.
that's
So-
what I'm saying, is if it's conceptual, now the board is gonna be able to provide input. If it's for a variance, conditional use, the board's not gonna provide input. They're gonna receive testimony.
Guess I'm not seeing where the challenge to the process, because if there's a decision involved, it's quasi-judicial, and it's gonna be, you know, we're gonna have to act and swear people in and so forth. There's no decision involved, it's a discussion, almost public hearing. It could actually be an item under public hearing, public to be heard.
Yeah, just differentiating in the agenda of anything that comes before and the planning, would have been planning commission versus something like a variance or a conditional use.
But I don't think we're gonna have to differentiate as much anymore, because
Oh,
it's
yeah,
gonna
no,
be
I'm-
it's gonna be one funnel.
Oh, exactly, I'm not suggesting that you differentiate,
Yeah.
I'm saying that as a board member, if you're doing a conceptual review, okay, that's different than if you're acting and making a decision, okay? As a conception, you can provide input, okay? Say, well, you know, I think you ought to, I don't like the color of that. You need more shrubbery, whatever. For zoning application, for variance, you're not gonna say, no, you got that wrong, I think you should have it further back, whatever. That, we cannot design. We say this over and over again in the zoning board. We're not designers. We're not gonna design your project. You present it as you wanna do it, we can say yes or no.
And I think the conceptual discussion isn't for the planning commission now or the DRB to design. It's more just the applicant wants to get some feedback to see,
I would
you know, before they're spending a lot of money, like, is this gonna fly? Does this meet the regulations?
No staff report.
What
It's
are,
a
what are some
free-flowing-
problems that you see?
I think
for
it's
this
more for them
application?
to put it in front of you, so when they bring in a full application, they're not treading water and you're not kicking it back to them, disapproving it. They want to come in so they know where the sticking points may be. I could be totally wrong, but this is what I'm conceptualizing. And a concept to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Will this fit with the regulation and what you think? Or should I modify it a little bit? And then when they come back with their full application, they have a better shot of it going through and being approved.
Even further up.
Yeah.
Will you guys even entertain this discussion on this application? Not necessarily will it fit the regulations, because that's a staff review, and that's when we start getting into decision. I mean, we're not designing for decision.
Right.
We're not even designing, we're evaluating to see whether or not
What'd
we
you
even.
say?
I know, you're right. We're not designing, we're looking to see whether the concept is something we even want to entertain.
And it's not because you don't like it, but it's because it doesn't
Does it
fit the
fit?
regulation.
Yeah. So anyways, that may be covered, a lot of that in the operating procedures too, is to firm up in the operating procedures, what, if anything, what sorts of reviews, because we're gonna have more reviews than just what's in the PC because of the stuff you guys have been doing. That all gets smushed in, and there should be clarity on that. And maybe as part of the workshop on this, we can take some previous zoning board reviews and PC reviews and see what they would have looked like if done as a DRB. Because you've got, those are closed cases, those are done,
Right.
they're past tense, you know all the pitfalls from them. And just see what they would have looked like if you did up an agenda for, you know, A, B, and C, where A was originally reviewed by the zoning board, B and C reviewed through the PC. What would that look like in a DRB framework? And then we could put it in front of Hubie, and you can make it be better. But I mean, that way we're looking at something real, sort of real, based on real events, real data, and can see sort of what it would have looked like if we'd had to work with it.
I just asked for pardon my ignorance and newness.
No
but,
pardon.
Yeah, no pardon is right. Just clarify for me in the concept moving forward, as an application comes, or an applicant comes in, what's going to PC and what's going to DRB, right? There's been, I've watched some of the meetings and I've seen that, you know, where there's some discussion about like conceptual, sketch, not sketch, like what in that process, what's coming to PC and what would go to DRB.
So any development application would go before the DRB. So that would mean anything that's conceptual, if you have any sort of subdivision. So it would be boundary adjustment, simple parcel, a major or minor subdivision, and that major or minor go through a multi-step process. So anything in that process, so you'd hear terms like sketch and preliminary and final. A site plan application would go before the DRB. So those are things that the Planning Commission normally hears. The ZBA, everything that they hear goes before the DRB. So that would be a variance, a conditional use, an appeal of the zoning administrator's decision,
Unspecified.
an unspecified use.
Yeah, I think one of the frustrations that's been, I think, for the planning commission and for the zoning board and for applicants is there are some things that go before both,
Right.
you know, which is like, what are we doing here, you know, and so on. So I think the DRB helps to straighten some of that stuff out.
For sure, yeah. So the Planning Commission then will do purely planning. So that does involve amending zoning regulations, which would be applied by the DRB, but it's also applied by the zoning administrator and just in general, the town. But also short-term planning projects, long-term planning projects. Planning Commission can help with capital planning. That's a statute-enabled role.
Our town plan.
The town plan
updates.
update. Yeah.
Planning commission makes the
Strictly
rules,
planning.
DRB adjudicates them. Whereas today, there's 2 adjudications going on.
Did I catch everything at the DRB, or was there? I just feel like there's a little
Honestly,
something maybe.
I think it's anything that's an application
Yeah.
goes to the DRB.
Yeah.
And everything planning goes.
Right. And there are some applications that, like that are administratively approved now. That won't change. So any sort of like a zoning permit, it can be approved by a zoning administrator. It remains the same.
I think Act 47 did some minor amendments
If we choose to.
if we choose to, yeah.
So Catherine, do you feel you're on solid ground right now as far as progress wise towards?
I think so. And I also, it's good to think about in the fall, there can be some more discussions here. And so I think as far as the timing of getting the operating procedures together, it doesn't have to happen maybe next week. That could happen in the fall. I think sooner the better, but I don't know if there would be time for another joint meeting, or if there is, that's great. But
Well, it might be good too. I mean, if we get to that stage, depending on when they do the appointments, to be able to have, basically operating procedure workshops with both sitting members and designated future members.
I think that would be good. Oh, one other question. Just thinking sort of logistically about when should the DRB meet and when should the PC meet? I know we said once a month for each. Is there a preference of what day or what day of the week? I mean, Thursday has always been the time for both boards.
First Thursday of the month, or second Thursday of the month for PC, and fourth Thursday of the month for DRB, or vice
First
versa.
Thursday of the month for DRB.
Okay, that works too. That absolutely works perfectly.
I mean, they're completely different agendas now, so it doesn't really matter if you're the first and the second of
Right.
first week of the month, the second week of the month, or first and fourth. It just doesn't.
Kind of is going to be on what the flow of what are the other thing we do have to keep track of, if we're only meeting once a month, the tickers on, when projects will slip through automatically approved have to be considered.
Mhm.
You know, so, you know, even though we're only, if the DRB only meets once a month to begin with, it may require, based on an application being in flight, it may require an additional meeting so that the automatic acceptance doesn't kick into, clause doesn't kick into play. Something like that. And it's, you know, once it's started, the clock starts, and you can't,
Right.
unless you are very good about keeping it done or public hearing open. And it's just something to keep in mind as we start stacking them up and the workload gets more.
I think that the engineers and stuff are familiar with PC having, well, right now it's been the first meeting of the month because we made planning the second meeting of the month, so.
Which is the second
Second Thursday.
Thursday.
So
Yeah.
to me, the second.
Fourth Thursday.
The second Thursday of the month should be DRB and the fourth should be.
Unless it works for the ZBA, current ZBA members who are going to the,
Yeah.
is to
So
be the
maybe
first, so.
Is Thursday, I mean, what happens if, is there another night of the week, not Thursday, that could be used through the PC? The reason I'm asking is if you do have to expand the DRB to another night, do you do 2 consecutive Thursdays, or do you split them out again?
I think Thursdays are wide open, so I mean, sticking to a Thursday, I think is a good idea. We've got four or 5 Thursdays to work with.
And conference room for both our Thursdays, I think that we should stick with Thursday.
Yeah. So it could be that the DRB is the first and the third, and the planning is the second or the fourth. Or if,
I mean, you were originally talking about, you know, 1 meeting for each to start with to see what the cadence was gonna be.
right,
That might be something that you want to revisit by late fall, see how many applications are stacking up. Because you told them they're not going to be reviewed. If you've got a ton of applications waiting to kick in right after the 1st of January, maybe we need to start with 2 DRB meetings a month.
right.
Because if there's enough, if there isn't, then,
Hard to tell.
because it's
Not
still,
right
I mean,
now.
you guys are still the staff, you guys are the only staff here, so it also is an impact on you guys.
Right,
'Cause
so
it's gonna
probably
be-
a separation, you know, whatever the thing is, 2 weeks between, just for packets and everything else, trying to pull together the following week. If we had a DRB meeting the first Thursday of the month, or, I'm sorry, the second Thursday of the month, we're putting packets together by the Friday before, and then same for PC. It doesn't really matter, I don't think, to be quite
Yeah, I
frank.
mean, there's not really overlap between the two boards and the
Right.
packets. at
Right,
least.
but I just think it would be good to have that week separation just for our own sanity in the office. to be
Too late.
frank.
Way too late.
What remains anyway. And it might be good for our service members who are going to be doing dual service. So you have a break in between instead of 2 weeks.
In a row.
in a row.
Or your planning commission packages won't be anywhere near as big as they were,
No,
right?
It might be bigger though, because there's a lot of planning initiatives that have been put on the shelf or delayed because of, but
Right.
if planning all of a sudden goes, you know, blossoms, the work could be different.
And the PC might need to meet twice a month because of it.
for a little
you know?
bit.
No, forever.
Well, maybe forever.
From my experience in other towns, the PC met twice a month. So it's not, I'm saying it just from my experience. And I'm more likely seeing the DRB to meet once.
So maybe the better thing to do is to block off 2 a month for both boards to begin with, and and negate the second one, cancel the second one as the workload allows. I mean, then you've set an expectation that of these days are going to be DRB, these days are going to be PC, and if it's not needed, then it's canceled.
Right. Yeah, assume that, say it's the first Thursday for the DRB.
First and third, and second and fourth.
Yeah. But assume that the first would be the one and the fourth, or the third would be the one that would not meet. Yeah, right.
Okay.
But that would be the first and the second, so whoever's serving on both boards would have 2 weeks in a row consistently.
Would that be hard for staff to have those two in a row?
We don't care about staff.
Yeah. So I have to say, I'm not planning on going to DRB meetings. So it wouldn't be hard on me. These guys.
I don't know what my, I mean, if I'm going to all those meetings, then
That's a lot.
then that's 4 night
It's every-
meetings
it's-
plus
yeah,
the
Other.
Every month.
Conservation and Trails
Yeah.
Committee meeting, so that's 5 night meetings.
This
so-
is why I'm gonna suggest that we hire a new planner, actually. So,
An additional.
an additional
Yeah, an
planner.
additional one.
Okay.
No, no.
An additional player.
Yeah, additional, one
I'm very,
more.
very happy with Kent.
Good clarification.
Thank you for the clarification.
No, an additional planner who would be doing the development review, probably. He's got, like he's saying, a million other things that he is doing and wants to do.
I could keep the
So.
planning commission busy.
So I mean,
I need to do.
it just sounds like that is maybe easier to schedule to the harder, or the larger amount, the expectation, and then back it off as needed. Because we can always cancel me. It's a lot.
Right.
If it's on like my personal calendar, I know that the second and fourth Wednesdays I'm planning on them, but if one gets canceled, it's no burden. If one gets added meetings are a burden. I think it's a burden all the way around, but that's, I mean, what's harder to deal with?
I might just add that if you have 2 meetings per month already scheduled, it gives you an option for just a working meeting that you could get together, non-quorum, you could just work on things that second meeting, and you'd already have something kind of blocked in your schedule if you just wanted to get together. Also, so that might be kind of nice to just
Can the DRB have a pizza
have yourself.
budget?
Yeah, we do not have a budget for pizza.
We need a line item for DRB pizza.
You know, I can try to add that into the budget for next year.
It just seems, I mean, I would think, I originally was thinking one per month and then expand as needed, but quite frankly, I think it would be easier to contract than it would be to expand.
Yep. And we could play it by ear for the first season, so we could plan on 2 meetings a month for the first 3 months. If they're filled, then that kind of sets a precedent and an expectation. If we don't have that much business ahead of us, then we could contract back to 1 meeting a month.
And we talked about doing either 6-month or 1-year evaluation.
Right.
Yeah.
In the process. So I mean, that we should be building that into this plan as well, that we revisit. I would say revisit the operating procedures and the schedule, the whole, the working process. Are there major changes that need to be, but revisit it at 6 months, officially revisit it, not just put it on maybe, actually make it a target to revisit. What policy are we missing that we need to update? What's happening that's working, what's not working? Okay.
Right.
So is there anything else you wanted to put in front of us tonight? It seems like we covered some ground.
We have. This has been very productive, I think.
How are you guys feeling?
I was gonna make a note here, on page 10 of the Planning Commission operating procedures, which is page 26 of this packet that we got. Under section 15, it says, in cases where the conflict of interest procedures in section 12 have not been followed, that should be section 13.
That's the Essex.
Yeah,
Version of it.
yeah, it's a
Typo.
it's a typo.
Yeah.
Had me confused.
Okay. Do you need anything else from any of us, or is any, Nick, QB? Anybody have any additional thoughts, comments that you want to throw into this? Georgia, you've been way too quiet.
I like the idea of the 2 meetings, scheduling the 2 meetings, and then if you don't like it, you drop them.
No, I'm good.
From a planning meeting perspective, that sort of as you said, if you set up work groups, that second meeting could be used for the work groups.
I think that's great.
Well, with that, Josh, any commentary you'd like to add to this?
I just wanted to say I really like the idea of sort of Monday morning quarterbacking old applications with sort of new DRBIs. I like that idea. Whenever that happens, and I agree with what was just said about if we have 2 PC meetings, using the second one for work groups, or if there's not the need, just having 1 meeting. I agree that it makes more sense to start with 2 and you can go down to 1 rather than the inconvenience of going from 1 to 2. That's what I got.
Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add in? We got fences to talk about.
Fences. Yes. Okay, so I see it essentially, and Hubie is the one who is helping us bring this process or the discussion up. But what I see is, one is we can streamline our regulations better, references of fences in many different places, and I think for an applicant, and even for staff and review boards, can be confusing because you might miss something somewhere. So if we could try to consolidate things into one spot as much as possible, I think that makes a lot of sense. We recently did that with the sign regulations. So we had the business design control overlay signs in the that zoning district section. We moved it over to the sign section. I think it was a big part of it was lighting as well. So I think, the idea, whenever we can do that, I think that's a good idea. The other one is just to maybe do some updates to the regulations to, make them more effective, maybe matching a bit more of what some other towns have done, and just improving them overall. And so what's included in the packet is a list of things, but the existing fence regulations is it's actually section 3.4, so you'll see that reference. So it says 3.5 because this is a draft version, and I had added in waivers to section 3, so it bumped everything down 1. So if you've noticed the inconsistency there, that's why. So there's also then all the notations where fences are found in the regulations. So again, that's where we can maybe try to consolidate it into one section. And then there's some other towns regulations. So Colchester, Williston, and then a little bit from Jericho, and then a couple images. And some of this was provided by Hubie. Some of it was us working together on it.
So my big question, and I've learned this because we've got a new release train engineer at work, and he does this. What are we actually trying to solve? What are we trying to fix? What's wrong?
Well,
and what's broken?
okay. Well, good evening again. I'm Hubie Norton. I live on Maple Lawn Drive. Been there for nearly 54 years, and I'm here to talk about fences. So, and for full disclosure, I am on the zoning board, but I'm not here speaking for the zoning board or on their behalf or anything. This is my own thing. So fences are important, as illustrated by the fact that the word fence or fences appears 31 times in the regulation. And I think Catherine has kind of summed it up nicely, that it probably could be cleaned up to consolidate some of this under one part. When you look at the regulation in its entirety, there are several instances where fence types and heights and so on are explicitly specified. For example, in the Historic Preservation Design Control District, in the Scenic Resource Protection Overlay District, there are some specific requirements for fences. On page 50, I think I found this was kind of a conflict here in essence. On page 50, under Article 3, General Standards, I'm going to read this. The regulation notes that if a proposed development abuts a residential property, separation between the proposed development and the adjacent residential property shall be provided by either a 20-foot buffer area and fence or a 50-foot buffer area. Here's the hooker. if a fence is used, the fence shall not be more than 5 feet in height, shall not be more than 10 feet from the affected property line, may not be completely opaque, and shall not be continuous. Now, so that restriction that is there, that is a general restrictive philosophy that's expressed in that section doesn't carry through for the rest of the regulation. So specifically, why wouldn't that kind of consideration be given for a fence adjacent to any residential property? If it's there for that specific instance, presumably protecting the residential property, why shouldn't it be specific for any residential property? That's one example of where there are kind of conflicts within the regulation. Why the regulation is regulating heights and types in some areas, but not in all areas. In short, the regulation needs an overhaul, specifically the section 3.4 and fences and wall. And anyway, it's, I think that, as Catherine has said, I'm a believer in not reinventing the wheel. Other towns adjacent to us, South Burlington, Williston, Westford, Jericho, Colchester, and some of these have been included. They have some regulations on fences that are much more explicit and go much more in depth than the Essex regulations are. And I think they can be used as guides. It's, it's the old search out and use best practices to come up with a solution. So I think the information is there as guidance, and it could be useful to improve the regulation regarding fences. Yeah. So as I've been thinking a lot about this, and then, as a matter of fact, included in what has brought this to fruition, I make no bones about this. What included with your packet, there are a couple of pictures that I took from my backyard to my neighbor's fence that is 12 feet high. Stockade fence that encircles 3/4 of his property. Only a very small portion of that fence is adjacent to my property, but my neighbors, three of my other neighbors, had this 12-foot high fence all around them. Anyway, it just is, it's inappropriate for a residential area. There's no way that it's appropriate. There are regulations in the statute, and indeed in our regulation, that talks about spite fences, okay? And spite fences are very difficult to prove, as some attorneys have said. You've got to have some very explicit kind of thing. Remember, there was a thing down in southern Vermont at one time where somebody had put up this horrendous billboard thing, okay, adjacent to their property. It was, pretty explicitly seen that it was a spike fence. But anyway, there needs to be work on the regulation and all, in total. Like, and sometimes using that catchphrase, that it's not in character with the surrounding area. We see that in our regulation frequently about describing what's allowed or not allowed. Is it in character with it, particularly for, I say conditional uses and so on. So anyway, as I was thinking about this, I wanted to end up with Robert Frost had a actually it's quite a famous poem called Mending Wall, and it's been referred to philosophically by folks talking about walls, things like the Berlin Wall and things like that. And so I'm going to read a couple sections of this. Here are a couple lines from this. In the poem, one neighbor says, "Good fences make good neighbors." In another section of the poem, another neighbor says, "Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I asked to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down." So, anyway, contemplating fences, it's a big item, important in the regulation, and I think it needs some attention.
Can we poke at that a little bit, maybe?
What's that?
Can we poke at that a little bit?
Focus it?
Poke at it.
Poke at it?
As a
Poke at
discussion,
it?
'cause
Focus? I'm getting hard of hearing too, so.
So, the 12-foot fence, what is it that would make it be inappropriate? And I want to find elements.
That would make it what?
Inappropriate.
Inappropriate? Well, it's out of character, okay? It's absolutely out of character. Where else do you see 12-foot fences? If you look at these regulations in the other towns, some of them are quite, are very limiting. They'll allow a 4-foot fence. Anything over 4 foot, you got to go before a commission to have it approved. So it's the spite fence statute says that a fence should not block sunlight or something like to those that deprive the neighbor of
Light or air?
light or
Light and
air.
air.
Yeah. Well,
Very familiar with
I'll tell you, okay, a 12-foot fence is depriving at least some portion of the adjacent property of light. Okay? It's certainly depriving the adjacent property of more light than a 6-foot fence would. So again, where do you draw the line? I think there's some reasonableness that needs to be applied. Looking at these other town regulations, okay, that have set limits on fence heights, okay, tells me that it's enough of a concern in these other towns that we ought to have a likewise concern.
So I would push back a little bit because I feel like we're starting to get into the area of how high your fence can be, what material your fence can be, what color can your house be.
Well, let your mind wander just a bit, okay? Let it go and think about the most absurd kind of fence that could be built under the current regulation. What it could be, what the material it could be made of, and the height it could be. What about a 30-foot fence? That's made of, let's see, let me think here. What would be good? How about automobile hoods? Okay?
So, but to that point, I mean, where do we draw the line between what the town can regulate and what individual expression?
We regulate it all over the place, okay? It's called setbacks for one thing.
But
Okay?
we're talking about.
Oh, I know.
So with this, I mean, I can see, a 12-foot fence seems extreme, but is there a valid reason for it? Is it just because?
I don't know. Ask my neighbor.
Is it structurally sound?
Well, as a matter of fact, there's some of the regulations in some of these towns that if you build a fence over a certain size, it now is classified as a structure and must meet setback requirements. I had made the argument on this fence, this particular fence, okay, that this was a structure. I estimated the cost at something around $12,000–14,000 to build this fence, okay? If that's not a significant expenditure and is not a structure, I'm not sure what is. So it's you can say it's in the eyes of the beholder. There are limits for sure. What is a fence? Okay, there's a rail fence, there's a picket fence, there's a barbed wire fence. We restrict fences by barbed wire. Okay, my God, they had a discussion at the select board meeting the last time that they were talking about fences. I thought it was going to go on forever about where you could use barbed wire and where you couldn't. It's a sensitive, important subject.
Yep.
And right now, I think the regulation is lacking. It allows for absurd uses of fences and fence material that is just not reasonable.
So potentially, without infringing, and I'm extremely sensitive to telling somebody how their property has to look. And I think
so am I.
That's
Come by my house in the spring, and you'll see no mow May in full bloom. Okay, because I don't mow my lawn in the spring. Okay.
But we talk about we talk about paint, we talk about business design control district, we talk about overlay districts for scenic preservation and so forth. But we start getting into the residential. Do we stand on safety? Is there height over which structural integrity is such that is hard to guarantee, and it becomes a danger to the neighbors? That to me would be a concrete sort of thing to put in. Not, I don't like your fence, it's too tall. I've been through that myself.
Maybe they have velociraptors.
That could be too, in which case we need to grant them an extra 12 feet, because they jump. But building materials, that's a reasonable,
Yeah.
sort of thing, but then we're starting talking about overlay districts and what your building materials can be. Restrictions on fence material used for agricultural purposes, so your barbed wire. I mean, it makes sense not to put barbed wire in the residential area, but does that include, chicken wire? Is it, are we talking?
Some of these town regulations, they limit that kind of thing. They limit chicken wire, they limit chain link fences, okay? You put in chain link fences, but they must be color coded, okay, or plastic wrap, so, I'm not saying that every element of these regulations that these other towns have, it needs to be implemented here, not by any stretch. I'm just saying there's a lot of guidance that exists here, and you read through these things, and you look at what they're talking about, and you can start to see the kinds of things that they're trying to avoid, okay? They're trying to avoid, over the top, obscure and obscene fences, okay? And they're saying, these are the, Burlington, my God.
Let's not use Burlington.
No, I was gonna say, no, that's why I didn't bring it up before. I looked at their regulations, and that's really out of the wall.
I mean, it's interesting because, we start talking, if it's a privacy fence, you want it to be as high as you can. And the structural integrity is one that to me is a measurable amount that we could start evaluating. Is it structurally sound at what height? Depends on what material you're using, right? I mean, if you're using, but it's an interesting discussion, and I can understand cleaning up the regulations to centralize it, so we don't have different references and so forth, but.
There's another part where our regulation currently says a fence should be built such that it can be maintained by the property owner that erects the fence by remaining on their own property, okay? It says also that you can build a fence on a property line. Some of these other towns, their regulation says that you cannot build your fence on the property line. It must not be on the property line, okay? It must be offset from the property line, which I think is not a bad idea. Because if someone builds a fence on the property line, now, how can you realistically maintain it by not, by staying on your own property? I was just recently on a trip where in the British Isles, there's some of those places there, they have some specific regulations where in this town, your backyard fence on the right side is maintained by you, the backyard fence on your left side is maintained by your next door neighbor, and so on. So they have some very specific areas how, who should maintain fences. Vermont, there used to be, and I meant to check on this too, that there is a Vermont statute that provides for appointing or electing fence viewers. And that goes back to colonial times when it had to do with a fence viewer could settle disputes about fences, particularly for keeping in livestock and so on, and who was to maintain a particular fence. Hey, Joe, you let my cows loose because you didn't maintain your whatever. Essex currently doesn't have a specific fence viewer, but I'm wondering if those duties have been assigned to someone. Do you know offhand?
I don't.
Because I believe that there's still, there is statute, it's quite explicit. It talks about all of the different things that a fence viewer can do. And it relates mostly to, livestock and that kind of thing. So, again, fences have been important for a long time.
So do you have an idea, do we have an idea of really how many impact? This is a clearly defined impact. This is a clearly defined example. I could provide another one, my personal one, but do we have an idea in the community now how much of an impact this is? I'm cautious about not cleaning up the organization of the regulation, but I'm cautious about adding restrictions and requirements that, we have a number of areas that are small lots. Most of the developments that were built before 1980 are quarter acre lots.
Yeah.
And to move, to take the example of one organization where you had to move the fence in from the property line, you're now losing potentially access to a fair amount of that lot we're granting it to the one on the other side that doesn't have access to it. That generates opportunity for significant conflict down the road with, what's it called? Eminent domain, not eminent domain, adverse possession. Creates a situation where adverse possession can come into play after 15 years of that fence being in existence. You've moved it in 6 inches or a foot or whatever. The person on the other side, if they've been maintaining it and you haven't, they can now lay claim to that.
Well, that's a legal thing, okay? You
but
know, and if you got it in your regulation, okay, that the fence should be offset from the property line, you know, that's, you know, adverse possession, that's a touchy area. Because it gets into driveways and all other kinds of things.
Well, fence lines are part of it too.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering how deep you, if, back to my first question, what are we trying to fix? It's a deep well to start going
Well,
into.
I think in the case, many times with, you know, okay, we do not have the zoning police, and nor should we have the zoning police, okay? My God, they have enough on their hands without cruising the neighborhoods looking for zoning violations, because they exist all over the place, okay? But people put up with them, and it's the same with fences, all right? If somebody puts up a fence that is an absurd fence to a neighbor, they're not likely to complain. They don't want to upset their neighbor, okay? They're not, you know, and if the regulation is wishy-washy, you know, they're less likely to complain, okay? If somebody builds a new shed and they put it right on the property line, violates the zoning regulation. Boy, they put that shed too close. But I'm not going to complain. People don't necessarily complain when there is a particular issue that might be disruptive to them. They rely on regulations to protect them. So I think this is an example of where you could have and may have situations throughout the town where fences have been built very high and inappropriately in the eyes of the neighbors or whatever. But people won't complain for
Can I ask you a
various
question
reasons.
For a second, I'm just really curious. Do you know why your neighbor made such a tall
I
fence?
have no idea.
I mean, I'm just wondering because, like, where I used to live, deer were a huge problem all over the neighborhood, and there's no way a 6-foot fence would keep a deer out. Probably
Yeah.
even a 12-foot fence.
Not a
would keep
problem
deer
here in
out.
this neighborhood.
I was just kind of curious what. I mean, obviously they put a lot of effort into making that fence.
Yeah, I mean, my
So
God, these are.
I will just
Curious.
speak to this fence a little bit in that I did receive a complaint from a property abutter, and I did reach out to the town attorney, who advised that there's not enough to go forward with to pursue a spike fence, which is very difficult to get. Without saying too much, I became aware as time went by of maybe some activities on that property that they, you know, maybe had structures that they didn't want to get permits for and other type situations, which is, I'm guessing, why they put a 12-foot high fence up. And what's sad about this is they took 2 picket fences, used fences, and cut the tops off of one and then placed the other fence on top of it. So not only is it 12 feet high, it's not very, you know, becoming to have to look at it.
But it's structurally sound.
But it's
not a danger.
structurally
Oh,
sound.
yeah, my
So
God,
there was-
they're 8x8 pressure treated, I mean, they built a hell of a good fence, okay? I mean,
Well-
these are 8x8s, like I say, that are sunk, you know, 6 feet in the ground, or at least 4 feet in the ground and so on, so they're,
We've had discussions, I know we had discussions about this before, and like, the discussion point came up of not having 2 fences stacked on top of each other. But that statement by itself is open to a lot of unintended consequences. If somebody has a decorative fence, picket fence with a decorative fence at the foot, you can't have it if you have a decorative fence. I mean, it ends up, even if
Again,
they're 4-footers.
these regulations from these other towns, you look at them, and they deal with those kinds of things. They define how a fence is measured. It's not measured from the bottom of the fence, it's measured from the ground, okay? So somebody can't put a fence up that starts
Yeah,
4 feet up
you-
and goes like this,
Why not?
okay?
Why not? Why not? though? I mean, that's part of what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
to, is the subjectiveness of saying you can't put an 8-foot fence or a 10-foot fence or a 12-foot fence.
They're limiting the height, okay? They're limiting the height.
But I'm not, that's not all of it, though. Some of the conflict with this is the appearance, right? Some of the conflict is the fact that it's two used fences put together.
That,
And this is
that's
just
one part of this, you need to look at these regulations in total, okay? They are quite comprehensive, particularly the one in Williston, quite comprehensive. The one in Jericho is probably the most succinct. It says if you got a fence over 4 feet high, you gotta come to the DRB. You know, so, you know, you can cut it as tight as you want, or you can get into a lot of details, but our regulation is lacking.
I would argue back a little bit against what is it, I want to know what is it's lacking.
Well,
Because
tell me
here's-
why the philosophy that's expressed in section 3, where it says you've got an area that you're developing next to a residential area, and you must have a fence there or a 50-foot setback. And if you use a fence, it can only be so high. Why is it?
That's fine. We want to talk about the development, like developers review and developers application, that's fine. But I'm more focused on the unintended, or the consequences to the individual landowners. Because if we start putting in, you can't put anything up over 4 foot, now you've got a 5-foot wire
I
fence.
didn't say that. I didn't.
But no, I'm not talking that you said that. I'm talking about the granularity of the review that we're trying to do. I'm
Sounds like you
encouraging-
don't want to address this. Sounds like you don't, and I'm not hearing from any of your other board members, which is, I find
Yeah,
very
that's-
interesting, okay? Do they have any comments about this, okay? You know, are you
Yep,
the
no,
only
no.
one that's talking about fences?
No,
I'm
I think
presenting
it's
my
you.
information.
What I would think is, that it would be great, I think, if you and I could sat down and find these points. What are the points that are missing? And I'll be quiet and let the rest of the members speak. But, you know, if there are, I think the two of us have the most to say about this subject in general. It would be interesting if we could come together.
I can
and
tell
hash
you
these pieces
that I could
apart.
take the regulations that are presented with the Williston regulations and the South Burlington regulations, Colchester regulations, and pull out of those regulations the points that I think are salient to this question. And it provides a lot of definition of what should be allowed. And anyway,
Interesting. Yeah, no, this is that's what I said. This is a deep well. Needs a
people can
fence.
paint their house purple with green polka dots. I don't care that, you know, and I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
I've seen instances, as a matter of fact, in this instant right here, this picture I've shown, this is an instance where there are two fences that are side by side. You know, this one property has their 12-foot fence, and right beside it is another 6-foot fence. You know, it's like, you know, doesn't make sense, okay? And I'm not saying that you make a regulations to not have that occur. Fine, people want to do that, it's okay. All right, but if you have some reasonableness about what is expected for a fence, and before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I would give a fence. You know, it's like, they're sensitive, it's sensitive. And I'm sensitive about this because I think the regulation is lacking. Significantly. Not just a few words, but significantly. And I offer my guidance, the examples, you know, from those other adjacent towns. Can they all, you know, are we the exception? Yeah.
Well, I actually like the Colchester regulations, of all the ones that you presented. I wasn't trying to think of them as being intermeshed and picking out of one or the other town, like you were just saying, pick and try to build from the examples given. I just thought that the Colchester one was pretty good, pretty comprehensive. I like, especially at the end, kind of saying, well, you know, if the fences already exist, we're not really talking about that at all.
That's the same with virtually anything.
Yeah.
You can't make a rule and have it retroactive.
So
That's a foregone
my
conclusion.
small bit of input on this
Yeah.
fracas.
I
also like the idea of consolidating the fence stuff in the regulations we have, not having to be all over the place, different purposes.
I don't think a height restriction is ridiculous. I think the aesthetic concerns, I would be hesitant to put in restrictions about, you know, as long as it's safe and structurally sound, but I don't think saying, you know, over 8 feet, over, one of them said just nothing over 12 feet. I think that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Restricting light and air at that point, right? Even if it wasn't intended to be, I mean, I don't know.
I thought it was interesting that you didn't want to have any bare galvanized chain link fence. Had to have coatings on it. I don't understand that.
Yeah, some of these things is probably would be good to know some of the history, you know, that exists. All right, you know, there may be some precedent or something that came up. Like if you're looking at the DRB procedures, you want to see some DRB procedures. Look at Westford's. My God, you've seen them, haven't you? Yeah, they're like, I don't know how many pages long, but boy, I'll tell you, they have in their procedures about how somebody can be removed from the meeting and so on. And so the history there is, probably you may know some of, if you go towards Fairfax, okay, there's a guy that has a few sculptures there, you know, and so on. So anyway, so some of these things may come from history, all right, you know, some of these requirements. I don't know, but that's.
No, I'm sure you're right. It's how like a lot of laws get written. So.
Yeah, barbed wire. That's that's a sensitive thing too. You know, so yeah, because the select board, some of the select board members are farmers and so on. So boy, they get pretty excited when you start talking about where you're going to limit barbed wire
or electric fences.
Or electric fences. Yeah. So yeah, it's there's histories that need to be considered. So anyway, shot my load there, and any questions? Like I say, I think best practices using you know, why reinvent the wheel? There's good language out there that can be utilized and incorporated, and I hadn't thought much about what you said, Catherine, about, you know, yeah. I went through, I just did a word search on fence and fences, and fence, my God, it shows up 31 times. So it's important. But yeah, kind of get it under one roof.
Yeah.
Because you can't pull the fence apart if it's all on the side. You can't.
Yep.
So are you, at this point, looking for this to be included, you know, work on this to be included in this round of zoning amendments?
Well, I would take my direction from the planning commission. So, I feel like I'm hearing yes to trying to clean up random references and try to put it as close as we can, or, you know, into one spot. Hearing that, I'm not sure about the rest. I've heard, I guess, 3 different opinions, but I don't know.
I would be in agreement with consolidation, and centralizing, you know, that as a starting point to forward. Hubie, as the initiator of sort of the request of the process, you indicated there were some elements from the various ones, specific line items that you feel would encapsulate what you're trying to get to. Is that something you'd be able or willing to call out?
Well, I can. I mean, like I say, I can pull out from what I've seen in some of these other regulations that I think would be appropriate for a new regulation.
And I think this would be
send them yeah.
for discussion with by the planning commission.
Yeah.
So not necessarily to have Catherine put it in at this stage.
Yeah, I know. I'll send them in to her, and she can distribute them. You know.
And then we can have the discussion on those items, and I would like you, if you're able to be here, to participate in that discussion. Either as the individual who's would like to see these things cleaned up.
Yeah.
It would be good to be able to do this, but I'd like to. The rest of the commission here that's here, Josh, you guys that are here, how would you like to approach this?
Well, I think, well, it's kind of a hard question in the sense that you want to have regulations that keep fences from being too tall, but at the same time, you don't want to make it real restrictive where, you know, people can't do different things, I guess. So I guess cleaning up the regulations and then also thinking about, you know, what is the maximum height somebody can have a fence would be really good to do. And I see Hubie's point. And I mean, that's not an attractive fence. And so I think we should look into it.
One of the things with these the town, different towns' regulations is that if fence is outside of what's allowed with simply, you know, without a permit, okay, that it goes before the DRB.
Yeah.
So there's an adjudication process there, okay, that allows for some flexibility.
Yeah.
All right, so, you know, it's not like it's a, you know, the speed limit is 50 and you went 55. It's like, okay, we can work with that, all right? Like, you ever been stopped for speeding? One of the first questions they ask you, are you a member of the military? And I remember, what difference does that make? Well, that's not a good thing to say. But anyway, you know, let's face
You
it.
get a ticket?
Yeah, yeah.
So let's take your suggestions here. Let's narrow them down, because I think a broad stroke isn't really what is required here at this
Yeah.
stage. The broad stroke on condensing, sure, but instead of us looking at all these different regulations, because even the one that John just pulled up, I found one item right there that's going to be a problem for maintaining a fence. If its construction is all from the other side, then you can't maintain it. Anyways, but let's see what you've done the work to collate some of this stuff. Let's actually get the specific, call out that
Yeah,
line item.
I will. I can do that.
And then let's take a pass at that and see whether or not that there's what items there are support for, what items need additional discussion, and what items might be restricted. Josh, does that sound reasonable to you? Or do you have a different thought?
No, I was going to say that condensing it, the disparate references for fences throughout the zoning into one thing makes sense, and then I agree with you that I'd want to see the specific call-outs, otherwise it becomes very difficult. I would agree with that.
And that gets us to the point of actually looking at the detail level of what you're looking to modify.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
let's
yeah. It needs some detail. Like I say, just think about it, okay? I have one daughter that's an artist. You know, like somebody said, my kid doesn't think outside the box. Hell, they don't even know there's a box. Okay, so let your mind wander and think about different things that could be used to build a fence, and that would meet the regulation. And it doesn't take you long to think of a crazy, crazy fence that could be built that would meet the regulation, but would be the craziest thing you ever saw, and would be offensive to the neighbors, the neighborhood, and maybe even the town.
So we're, even in that statement or this discussion, we've covered things, materials, height, where it can be put, you know, how, I think
Yeah.
there's a lot that some of it is very, very subjective. You know, just these materials, you know,
I agree.
let's find what we can agree on, what we agree with for your interpretation, what the commission agrees with, where we think we can move forward, where we might get burned, by putting something in that's, anyways, let's get into the detailed discussion on it.
Yep, I'll make a list. Check it twice.
Great,
Okay.
thank you. Good direction, me as well with the consolidation.
So that, anything and other business that you want to pull up?
Yes, just one thing. So the Upper Main Street planning project, the town-owned parcel, the plan I think at least at this point, is to have our first public meeting on August 1st for that. That's a Thursday. Don't really have any detail, but it would be in the evening. There was discussion about having the planning commission involved, perhaps like ahead of the meeting as like just a focus group or stakeholder meetings. Got to think through that a little bit more. So that would be, the consultant is coming into town the day before, so it would be like that Wednesday or Thursday, maybe during the day, pulling aside planning commissioners to talk a little bit about what they want to see, or trying to understand the process better. So I will say that Josh is a part of the leadership team, and so he is the project leadership team. So he is involved, and he's representing the planning commission in this process, if you remember. So he did attend a meeting we had a couple weeks ago. So more to come on that.
At 6:30, you know?
We don't have a time for sure, but it was like, yes, between 6 and 7 starting time, thinking probably the closer to 7, 6:37. Don't know where yet. Not planning on having it here, but we don't really figure that out. So also too, just to note, some of us talked about this at the beginning or before the meeting started, but you might notice some things happening up at the town-owned site, and it's not anything to do with this. It's the water main project, and it's just a staging area for that. So you'll see construction happening kind of down the Route 15 corridor up to I think Billy Butler Drive down. I forget where the end is, but on that side though of Route 15 through the summer.
Okay.
So if anyone asks you, like, wait, is the town already building their offices? Nope.
And is that a tree that's broken? Is that struck by lightning?
That willow tree.
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
Is that what happened? You
That's
think?
what I'm wondering.
Yeah,
It looks-
I just noticed that just
out.
coming in that it was
Yeah.
down. I said, I don't remember
Just
seeing
over
that
the
before.
weekend, I think. So,
So it must have happened with that big.
Either
storm
that or
that
somebody
come
from
through,
Underhill had the artillery piece pointed in the wrong direction.
Yeah, because it's definitely blown out.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, anything else that you guys wanted? Because I'm going to have you close your portion of the meeting in a moment, and then we'll close our portion.
I don't think so, not from me. Any other zoning board members that have? Okay, is there a motion to close? Well, I don't need a motion. Zoning board, will adjourn at 8:35.
Okay. And I would like a motion from the PC to close, to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Shu, seconded by Trevor. All those in favor of adjournment? Aye.
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 We are